Ugh. It might surprise you to know this, but I am a pretty big fan of emo.
I'm shocked.
Whether it's the 80s DC emotional hardcore, the 90s Midwest sound, 2000s bands like Fall Out Boy and Taking Back Sunday, I love it all.
Give me all of it.
Give me that sweet, sweet, sad music. But if I had to choose my favorite era of emo, it wouldn't be the 80s or the 90s or even the 2000s.
I'm shocked.
I know, surprising, right? I talk about the 2000s emo explosion every other video. But I think the era of emo that I connected with the most has to be the emo revival of the 2010s.
You weren't the only one who thought of us that way.
Hello and welcome back to Guy Who's Almost 30 Talks About Bands from His Youth. I'm almost 30. If you're new here, I'm Trevor and I am eternally uncool. I make videos about music, music culture, and anything that interests me, but mostly music right now. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, then I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and watching the rest of this video. I think I connect with the emo revival so much because I was the right age when it was happening. I was in high school and college, at my most vulnerable and impressionable. I was a young man with deep insecurities I had yet to face, a fear of talking to girls, and the beginnings of a drinking problem. I was the target demographic for this style of music. There were so many bands from this time that I loved that ended up becoming big names in the scene. Modern Baseball, Tiger's Jaw, The World Is. Whenever anyone talks about the emo revival, they talk about these bands. But they're only the tip of the iceberg. I remember there being so many great bands that don't get the same love and attention as Mobo or Joyce Manor. These were the bands that shaped my taste in the genre. Shaped me as a person. Okay, maybe that's an exaggeration, but they were good bands. What I want to do today is take a look at a few bands that seem to have been forgotten but played a huge part in the emo revival. At least for me. Maybe you remember these bands, maybe you don't. If you do, that's awesome. Stick around and listen to what I gotta say, and maybe we share the same opinion. If you don't, stick around, and maybe you'll learn something. With all that being said, grab a drink, grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's get into the video. Towards the end of high school, I'd say probably about my senior year, I was branching out and expanding my musical horizons. I was still repping for pop punk pretty hard, but I was giving other genres a shot. I was getting really into 60s British invasion stuff like the Zombies.
Tell her no.
Indie stuff like Foxtrot. And a whole lot of emo. This was about the time I discovered bands like Snowing and Camping in Alaska. They were really my gateway to the emo revival sound. I started looking for bands in a similar vein, and one of the first bands I remember being absolutely blown away by was Have Mercy. Have Mercy was formed in 2009 in Baltimore, Maryland by drummer Aaron Alt and guitarist Joey McCusker. Both had been in the local metal scene for several years and were looking to branch out and try something different. They decided to make music that was more in the vein of alternative rock and emo. They got in touch with a mutual friend, Brian Swindle, and asked him to be their frontman. And with that, they formed the first incarnation of the band. They released their first EP in 2011 called Land of the Pleasant Living. But I got into them 2 years later when they released their debut album, The Earth Pushed Back. My introduction to Have Mercy was a song from this album called Let's Talk About Your Hair. This song came on my Pandora when I was diving deep into emo. It's just a perfectly sad emo jam about a one-sided relationship. Something high school Trev knew a lot about.
I know that you know that I know.
I would listen to their next album, A Place of Our Own, and get all of those beautiful emo feels. It was really soundtracking my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college. Aaron Alt and Joey McCusker would leave the band in 2013 and 2014 respectively, leaving Brian Swindle as the only original member, and Aaron Alt would unfortunately pass away in 2019. They went through some label changes, going from Top Shelf to Hopeless to Rude Records. They'd take a break in 2020 for obvious reasons. But they soon reformed in 2022 and have been going pretty strong ever since, releasing their most recent album, Numb, in 2023.
The more that I speak, the more I feel so numb.
Have Mercy is one of those bands that really shaped my taste in emo when I was first getting really into the genre, and getting into the more modern bands. And even though I didn't get too deep into them, I still can't deny the impact they had on me. Their sound is understated and underrated. I highly recommend them for anyone who's into the more indie-leaning emo. There's some bands that just kind of stick with you. Sometimes you hear a band for the first time and it changes the direction of your life. Okay, that's a little dramatic. But sometimes you hear a song or you find a band and it really speaks to something in you at a formative time in your life. One of those bands for me was Crash of Rhinos.
Ignoration
Crash of Rhinos was one of those bands that I thought was really cool when I was in high school, kind of forgot about when I was in college, and now their name just kind of pops into my head every once in a while, leading me to listen to a bunch of their songs on YouTube or Spotify and wonder how they weren't bigger. Crash of Rhinos formed in Derby, England in 2009. They play a mix of emo, math rock, and post-hardcore. They have intricate guitar riffs and shouty vocals. Everything is real aggressive and emotional. Aggressively emotional. Kinda like how I was in college. Their style is similar to bands like Jawbreaker and Burning Airlines. I can't remember how I found this band. Probably YouTube or Pandora. Those were my two main music listening sources back in the day. I remember being intrigued by both the band name and the album artwork for their album Knots. While doing research, I found out that Crash of Rhinos is actually a term for a group of rhinoceroses.
The more you know.
Honestly, I hadn't listened to Crash of Rhinos for a long time before writing this video, and I gotta say, shit holds up. I love the more punky math rock style. That's the sound I always associated with emo. This is the kind of music that you can release all of your emotions and aggression to. Mosh while crying. Crash of Rhinos is really one of those bands that I just always find myself coming back to. Especially their album Knots. If you like the punkier side of emo with a healthy dose of math rock thrown in there, I highly recommend Crash of Rhinos. I don't know if this next band counts as emo, but I was listening to them a lot during this time, and they're always associated with the emo revival, so I'm gonna count them anyway. Crying was formed in spring of 2013 by 3 students at the University of New York at Purchase. Eliza Santos, who provided vocals, Ryan Galloway, who provided guitar and programming, and Nick Corbo, who provided drums. They played a hybrid of indie pop, chiptune, and synth pop, with a sprinkle of emo revival here and there. I remember finding Crying after they signed to Run for Cover Records. Run for Cover Records was my favorite record label in college. I would listen to any band on the label. I didn't care what they sounded like. Every band they signed was my favorite band. I thought it was the greatest label ever, and one of my goals was to form a band and get signed by them. We can see how that goal ended up. Crying was interesting because they mixed chiptune and 8-bit sounds into their indie rock and emo music. For some reason, I just love this. I love when bands include synths and bleeps and bloops, especially when the band isn't strictly techno or electronic. They only released one album, but that one album is so goddamn good.
Bed in the water, not sure why my feet are sweating.
Beyond the Fleeting Gates is probably one of the most underrated albums of the 2010s.
It's so good!
Imagine the sweetest indie pop album you've ever heard in your life, but it's also the soundtrack to some kind of lost NES game from the 90s. That's this album. Crying is a good band for anyone who likes their emo a little bit more bouncy, a little more peppy, and with a lot more Game Boy noises. If there's any emo revival act that had a huge impact on the genre as a whole, but are still yet criminally underrated, it has to be Empire, Empire, I Was a Lonely Estate.
On the late spring day, summer began to take shape.
Yes, that is the name. No, I do not know what it means. Does it mean anything?
Maybe.
I'm not gonna look it up. It's been a long week. Get off my back. Empire Empire was originally conceived in 2006 as a solo project for guitarist vocalist Keith Latinen, who started the project as a way to improve at his instruments so he could primarily make good music with the project Anna Flyaway, which he started with his wife, Kathy. But that project would eventually fizzle out, and the couple would continue on with Empire Empire. Empire Empire, I Was a Lonely Estate has a very 90s influenced sound. It's very comparable to bands like Mineral and Christie Front Drive and American Football. Everything is real earnest and indie rock oriented, as opposed to post-hardcore or pop-punk.
Same mistakes haunt you like they used to do.
They only released 2 albums, but those 2 albums are some of the best in the emo revival. And their contributions to the genre goes farther than just some really good songs. Keith and Kathy are the owners and operators of Count Your Lucky Stars Records. Count Your Lucky Stars has boasted releases from genre greats like Free Throw and Foxing and Snowing. Empire Empire, I Was a Lonely Estate is a band that I've always held in high regard in terms of emo as a genre. I always associate them as the creme de la creme of emo. I think it's because they're one of the first bands I discovered who were kind of newer and modern, who could replicate bands like Mineral and American Football that I was already into. There are so many other bands I wanted to talk about, but it would have made this video so much longer than it had to be. So depending on how this video performs, I'm probably gonna do another one. But what do you think? Do you know any of the bands I mentioned? Are there any bands you want me to mention in the next one? Let me know in the comments. That's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. But if you did enjoy it, then I highly recommend smashing that like button and sharing this video with everyone you know. I am a small, independent content creator who does pretty much everything on his own. So every like, every comment, every share, any interaction with this video at all really helps to get it pushed out to more people who might be interested in what I'm doing and want to subscribe to my channel. So with all that being said, thank you for watching. As always, I'm Trevor. Stay on cool. And that's the end of the video. Goodbye.